He didn't ask Benjamin Netanyahu, why did you work with Qatar to fund Hamas all those years? Why did you prop up Hamas all those years? Why, according to today's Israeli media, did you have reports that there was going to be an attack on your citizens and completely allow that to happen? Douglas didn't ask any of those questions. Instead, he'd like to spray around Hamas at the Muslim on the stage. Douglas referred to Hamza Yusuf, the First Minister of Scotland recently, as the First Minister of Gaza. Muslim guy. And he said, quote, you said, quote, he has infiltrated our system. Given we're at a debate about anti-Semitism, I find it ironic that you are throwing out some of the most bigoted dual loyalty tropes known to man.
In today's video, Mehdi Hasan destroys Douglas Murray on the monk debates as their clash over anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism explodes instantly. Mehdi Hasan pushes back hard with historical facts, legal context, and real-world examples that Douglas Murray struggles to counter, especially when the debate turns to Gaza, free speech, and how criticism of a government gets mislabeled as hatred toward a people. Hasan keeps the pressure on, exposing the gaps and inconsistencies in Murray's arguments with sharp, clear logic. So let's dive in and watch how Mehdi Hasan shuts down Douglas Murray on the monk debates.
I love the fact that Natasha started the speech by saying, our side cannot define Zionism, anti-Zionism, or anti-Semitism. So Gideon, you and I should just go check out the CN Tower, because I'm not sure what the debate's about. We're being told by the proposition that we must follow their definitions of what we're here to argue and vote about, which tells you how authoritarian that side of the motion. This debate for me tonight is fascinating because for years Douglas has been the free speech warrior and I've been the guy saying there's no right to absolute free speech. Tonight I feel the roles are reversed. I'm here to say, what happened to free speech? What happened to the ability to criticize others, governments, countries, yes, political ideologies, Natasha. Theodore Herzl would be surprised to hear you say it wasn't a political ideology or a national movement. And I just find it fascinating that Natasha made it very clear that non-Jews cannot define anything to do with this. And then Douglas stepped up and accused every Jewish protester against Israel of being an anti-Semite, which I find offensive and ridiculous. Thousands upon thousands of Jews. You don't have to agree with them, remember, you don't have to agree with them. But they took their right to go out on the streets in Toronto, in DC, in New York, in London, in Paris, all over the world, in Tel Aviv, to protest against what's happening in Gaza. And Douglas, one of the world's most proud atheists, not Jewish as far as I know, just damned them all as anti-Semites. Wow, that speaks volumes about where this debate is going and who is defining what and how. As for Natasha's line and Douglas's line that if you don't support self-determination for a particular group, you're a bigot, well, you know, we've already had a lot of votes, so I won't ask you to click. I don't have power over your clickers, but I'd love to know how many people in this room either were in the last Quebec referendum or supported it from afar, because we're in Canada, where a bunch of people want to leave Canada and do their own thing, and I'm sure many people in this room legitimately oppose that, and no one says you're bigots towards the people of Quebec. Nobody says you're anti-French language. You're allowed to have a debate about whether Canada includes Quebec or not. And you know, my friend Peter Beinart, who is Jewish, just so Douglas will call him an anti-Semite later, as he pointed out, the Basques, the Catalans, the Kurds, the Scots, they don't have states. And if you oppose them having states, you're not an anti-Kurd bigot, you're not an anti-Scot bigot, you're not an anti-Catalan bigot. People have arguments all the time. There are 5,000 indigenous groups in the world today. According to the UN, there are 193 member states of the UN. You do the math, right? So this is ridiculous, this argument that we are being expected to believe that if you don't support Israel as it is currently constituted, with Jewish supremacy, as Gideon points out, that makes you an anti-Semite. It's an abuse of anti-Semitism. It empties at a very important concept, at a very urgent time of all meaning, in order to defend a country which, as Gideon has pointed out, and which Douglas seems to think is fine, has killed tens of thousands of innocent people in recent months.
Watching Mehdi dismantle Douglas Murray's framing is honestly refreshing because he's pointing out something that gets buried under all the noise. Criticism of a government or political ideology is not the same thing as hatred of a people, and history backs that up. Around the world, nationalist movements are debated all the time. Quebec, Scotland, Catalonia, Kashmir, Kurdistan, yet nobody insists that disagreeing with a state structure automatically makes you bigoted toward the people who live there. That logic only magically appears when the topic is Israel, and Mehdi is right to call that out. And Douglas's attempt to label Jewish critics of Israel as anti-Semites falls apart the moment you look at the actual landscape. Groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, If Not Now, and Independent Jewish Voices Canada have mobilized tens of thousands of Jews worldwide. Rabbis, students, Holocaust descendants, and Israeli expats who openly oppose Israeli government policy. Even inside Israel, organizations like Breaking the Silence and B'Tselem include Jewish veterans and activists who've documented human rights abuses for years. Are they all self-hating? The accusation just doesn't hold up. Plus, the idea that Zionism can't be discussed or defined by non-Jews ignores the fact that scholars across political and religious backgrounds, Jewish, secular, Arab, European, American, have been analyzing it for a century, just like any other political ideology. Academia treats Zionism the same way it treats nationalism anywhere else, as a political movement subject to critique. In that context, Mehdi's pushback makes complete sense. He's defending free debate against people who suddenly want to shut it down the moment the topic stops favoring their narrative.
Let me just deal with a few things that Douglas said, because there were a few things were said. I mean, it's amusing. I wasn't surprised at all. I came to a debate in Toronto to debate Israel with two defenders of the current government, and so far Gideon and I, correct me if I'm wrong, we could have done a long list of you're apologists for genocide and war crimes and crimes against humanity. We didn't do that, but we've been called liars and Hamas supporters, and I get it. Neither of us talked about Hamas. We don't support Hamas. This is not a debate about Hamas. I know Douglas wants to redefine it as a debate about Hamas. Great, good for him, because he can't actually deal with the arguments we're putting forward. All the Jews who are putting forward these arguments, they're all anti-Semites, remember. I just want to deal with one point, very important here. Douglas is the great journalist in Israel. I love this. Cosplaying as a journalist, going into Gaza with the IDF. Douglas interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu in January. Douglas did not, you're very bothered by Qatar and funding Hamas.
They're your bosses.
But, well, we're talking about bosses, let's talk to this.
You're literally paid by them.
I've interviewed Qatari officials. You can go on YouTube and watch my interviews with Qatari officials. And then you can watch Douglas interview Benjamin Netanyahu, where he asked him pearls like, is there another chapter left in the Netanyahu biography?
No,
that was the strong question. He didn't ask Benjamin Netanyahu, why did you work with Qatar to fund Hamas all those years? Why did you prop up Hamas all those years? Why, according to today's Israeli media, did you have reports that there was going to be an attack on your citizens and completely allow that to happen? Douglas didn't ask any of those questions. Instead, he'd like to spray around Hamas at the Muslim on the stage. Douglas referred to Hamza Yusuf, the First Minister of Scotland recently, as the First Minister of Gaza.
Yes,
Muslim guy. And he said, quote, you said, quote, he has infiltrated our system.
Yeah,
given we're at a debate about anti-Semitism, I find it ironic that you were throwing out some of the most bigoted dual loyalty tropes known to man, referring to a born British Muslim politician as the First Minister of Gaza.
Mehdi, very briefly, because I've got a question for Douglas, very briefly.
I'll be as brief as everyone else. The proposition tonight, I've sprayed around the word lie and liar, so let's return the compliment. Natasha lied when she talked about UNRWA and terrorism. The UN set up an independent inquiry, asked the Israelis for evidence. I know you don't want to hear this. They asked the Israelis, she's parroting propaganda for the Israeli government. The Israeli government was asked to give evidence. They refused to give their evidence. Every Western government, including your own, Canada's, has restarted funding because they looked at the evidence and didn't see it. That's great. I get it. But as Douglas might have once said, facts don't care about your feelings. To come back to the other point of lie, Douglas says the war would end if Hamas gave back the hostages. Complete lie. The Israelis have said, even if the hostages come back, we carry on the war. In fact, I interviewed Avraham Munter's nephew. Avraham Munter is a 79-year-old Israeli hostage right now. Poor guy, tragic. 79-year-old in captivity, should be freed, of course, had to have his birthday in captivity. His nephew says that every time he goes on the streets, Ben Gvir's police beat him. They beat him and arrest him. They're arresting hostage members' families, hostages' family members.
What really stands out is how Mehdi Hasan keeps dragging the conversation back to something Douglas Murray never seems comfortable addressing, the actual power dynamics on the ground. And honestly, that's where Murray's whole framing falls apart. You can't talk about democracy while defending a system where one group has full legal rights and another group lives under military law with no citizenship, no voting power, and restricted movement. Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and even prominent Israeli organizations like B'Tselem have all said the same thing. The current structure isn't democratic, it's a stratified system built on ethnic hierarchy, regardless of what labels anyone tries to use. And when Douglas tries to make this all about Hamas, it becomes even clearer he's avoiding the uncomfortable parts. Because long before Hamas existed, Palestinians were still displaced, still stateless, still living under occupation. You don't need to take Mehdi's word for it. Israeli historians like Benny Morris and Ilan Pape have documented Israel's own internal debates about forced displacement dating back to the 1940s. Those issues don't magically disappear just by pointing at Hamas. Even the hostage families in Israel, who have every moral right to demand justice, are protesting their own government's handling of the war, asking why Netanyahu refuses ceasefire deals that would bring their loved ones home. That completely undercuts Murray's claim that ending the fighting is as simple as Hamas surrendering. Israel's own war cabinet members have openly said they intend to continue operations regardless. Mehdi isn't introducing some radical perspective here, he's pointing out realities recognized by human rights groups, legal experts, and even Israelis themselves. And that's exactly why Murray keeps shifting the conversation elsewhere.
And they're coming on TV and saying, why are we being used as props by people who support the war? He doesn't support the war, he wants a deal. Israeli family members are going on the streets and being tear-gassed and water cannon, whatever, beaten by the police because they want a deal and they want an end to the war that Douglas and Natasha so proudly support. They keep telling us about the horrors of October the 7th. I agree. This side shares the revulsion against the horrors of October the 7th, but we also share revulsion against the horrors that came since October the 7th. We don't support those horrors. I'm opposed to the war crimes that happened on October the 7th and the war crimes that have happened since October the 7th. Douglas, no, I've got to finish this point. I've got to finish this point. Douglas, the week after October the 7th, came out in The Spectator and advocated for the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, which is a crime against humanity under the Rome Statute. He said now is a...
Not true.
You said now is a good time to do it. So, Douglas earlier was telling us all about the importance of journalism going on the ground. While Douglas was getting awards from the President of Israel, we were actually reporting, my news organization Zeteo, from those campuses with Jewish students. In fact, the most read piece on our site is from a student called Jonathan Ben Menachem, who is at Columbia and reported from inside the encampment where they were having a Seder, where he was protesting war crimes in Gaza, which I know the other side thinks there are no war crimes, everything we just imagined the last 8 months. What you have to tackle tonight, I'm glad we brought up college campuses, because again, if this ridiculous sweeping motion, Douglas says complexity, we are the side of complexity, we're not the ones saying anti-Zionism across the board is anti-Semitism, you have to deal with the fact that college protests are disproportionate. There are a disproportionate number of Jews in these protests. They're all brainwashed, they're all idiots, they're all self-haters. Some of the top academics at Columbia University who are Jewish have come out to defend the protests. Annalise Orlek is a 65-year-old former chair of Jewish studies at Dartmouth. She was beaten on camera by police while she was protesting against the war in Gaza. Apparently Douglas, an atheist, says that she's an anti-Semite. That's the debate, that's what we've got to tonight, where the former chair of Jewish studies at Dartmouth is an anti-Semite, while Douglas is the champion of the Jewish people. I find it bizarre, and I'm glad we've brought up college protests, because it's the number one evidence right now in our discourse that actually a lot of young Jewish people, and by the way, this whole argument, why didn't you protest Sudan, why didn't you protest Syria? Last time I checked, the United States Congress does not fund Bashar al-Assad or the RSF militias in Sudan. So stop with this lazy whataboutism that gives you...
fund your friends in Tehran.
The US Congress funds Tehran.
You know very well Biden's package for Tehran.
What?
You don't know about it?
US funds Iran. Okay, you got me there, Douglas.
Wow.
By the way, since we're doing fact check, Natasha gave us a lecture about she's the lawyer on stage. That's true, you are the lawyer on stage. But literally, the chief prosecutor at the International Criminal Court has asked for arrest warrants. And you're booing again. I know you don't like it, but by the way, the advisor to the ICC chief prosecutor is a man named Theodore Meron, 94 years old, Holocaust survivor, former advisor to the Israeli Foreign Minister. He advised the ICC to ask for arrest warrants. But according to Douglas and Natasha tonight, and many of you, he's an anti-Semite too. Theodore Miron's an anti-Semite. Let's just keep the list going tonight till we vote tonight as to how many Jews we're going to call an anti-Semite tonight.
Gideon, you're up.
I will be one of them, obviously.
Of course. You're Hamas too, Gideon, don't forget.
What really jumps out in this is how Mehdi keeps exposing something Douglas Murray hopes no one notices. Israeli dissent isn't coming from fringe activists, it's coming from Israelis themselves. When hostage families are literally being shoved, pepper sprayed, and arrested by Israeli police for demanding a ceasefire, that tells you far more about the political climate than anything Murray is spinning on stage. Groups like Women Wage Peace and the Hostages and Missing Families Forum have been protesting non-stop, accusing Netanyahu of dragging out the war for political survival. That directly contradicts the idea that the war continues only because of Hamas. And when Douglas pretends campus protesters are all radical outsiders, the facts just don't support him. At Columbia, UCLA, NYU, and SOAS London, Jewish students have been among the organizers. Faculty members too. Prominent Jewish scholars like Judith Butler, Omer Bartov, and Amira Haas have spoken openly against the war and against attempts to smear critics as anti-Semites. That's important because it shows the divide isn't Jews versus critics, it's authoritarianism versus accountability. There's also the legal reality Douglas avoids. The International Criminal Court didn't conjure its case out of thin air. Their prosecutor consulted experts including Theodore Miron, a Holocaust survivor, former Israeli diplomat, and one of the world's top authorities on humanitarian law, before seeking arrest warrants for both Hamas leaders and Israeli officials. If even he says the threshold for war crimes has been crossed, that should make anyone pause. So while Douglas leans on emotional blame shifting, Mehdi's arguments line up with human rights law, academic consensus, and even internal Israeli dissent. Facts Murray can't just shout away. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out Ground News in the description down below.